Hello, Henry here from the Vicinity and Beyond podcast. And if you're still with us, you're here for part 3 of our 3-part in-person live recording finale of the first season. And this is it. This is the final episode where we finish off question time and we think ahead to the future. So enjoy. Move on to Penny. Got a question around bad bids.
Thank you. Can I make a comment as well before I ask my question? Could you please do an episode to explain to my family what my job is? And maybe you could include in it a guide for a prospective new voter. What is a bid? What do I need to ask them? What do I need to check? Sort of a reassurance approach. I think it would be really useful. I'd certainly send that.
That's actually a really good idea.
Thanks. My question was around how do we protect the industry from bad bids? A bad bid may be one that's poorly run, or at worst case one that's maybe semi-fraudulent. I do think we're very vulnerable to it. They're not going to step up and ask to be accredited. They're not going to volunteer to go through a standards sort of process. So how do we protect ourselves? Is the Pride in Place strategy an opportunity here to maybe for something to come through in that respect? Or is there a risk of officials who are not directly involved in this very broad industry putting in something well-meaning but perhaps counterproductive to try and protect the industry? I think it's really important, but I'm not sure there's an easy solution.
That puts me in the mind of the work I've been doing with Sydney in developing what is now a community improvement district principle. They've gone much further towards kind of really true community value and away from the business being king in this kind of initiative. And they're going much closer to the New York model of having effectively the kind of nanny state where the public sector authorises and controls the annual delivery. I feel quite nervous about that. We've got a very non-prescriptive legislation which allows us to have huge amounts of entrepreneurial spirit and freedom, and to stay very commercially minded and very much in the minds of the businesses that pay us. By doing that, you allow the rogues to behave badly because no one's policing them enough. I would be very nervous about going as far as the New York model where you have to apply annually to get your business plan and budget confirmed. And the way the regulations are sitting in Sydney at the moment, we've just put the response in, but I think it's putting too many checks and balances in and potentially allowing the businesses to vote for a SID to be established based on the principles they're given at that point, and then the veto afterwards by a local authority to change it. That just feels wholly wrong to me, because that becomes a tax, not a levy. When is a levy a levy? It's when it's not a tax. And if actually you're putting too much control somewhere else, it becomes a tax. I don't think we want that, but we do want the bad apples managed out as much as we can. And actually, I would come back to Alison's question, because that feeds into how do we ensure we as an industry police ourselves well? Alison, you did a bit of a killer question at the end.
I was cross on that day. It was the day I found out. There was a bit of debate on, I don't know where, probably the WhatsApp group, about the bid awards that what looked like some random organisation had created. And I just thought, we're very vulnerable here. There are consultancies circling us as an industry the whole time going, they've got money. What can we pretend that we can deliver for them? Sorry, it's all coming out now. That was dangerous, wasn't it? I'm quite in your bad bids conversation, because the only sanction available at the moment is the levy payer challenge. Right. Fran and I were talking about a bid that we know, and I've got some quite interesting governance questions about that particular bid. It would be inappropriate for me to go geeing up the businesses in that locality and say you ought to put in a challenge. But actually, who is going to challenge that model? I'm going to go back to what you first started with, which is, are we one big family? And what do we think is the future of collaboration between bids? Now that the bid foundation has a diminished visibility because it's been absorbed by the ATCM, which to all intents and purposes should have been a good thing. The big bids are working together in a closed format called High Streets UK. I'm not invited, I don't know who else is. And British Bids has additional priorities because of its ownership model. Then we've got these commercial interests. I'm definitely seeing big birds, but the Bid Awards is the example. But there are other examples. All that sort of diversity, even in our partnership working, who can and who should talk to government on our behalf? There we are.
Brilliant killer question. Thank you. I think it's fair to say that question is in everyone's heads. You're just the bravest one to say it. Well done. Certainly in my head all the time, because it is a nervous place for all, isn't it? We've grown sufficiently now that you're as old as me and you were there at the beginning, and a few of us were there at the beginning. We grew this collegiate spirit that we're all friends and working together. Nobody wanted to shaft each other, and we were quite open. And inevitably in any industry, as you get bigger, it gets disjointed and disaggregated, and there's less day-to-day facial interaction, and so less shame almost. So people do things that they perhaps shouldn't be doing, but actually nobody's challenging them. And that's sort of the root of Penny's question and a bit of the root of yours. How do we get this to a better place? In 2023, there was all this swooping going on. There was a team in government in trying to understand the bid industry. I volunteered to pro bono support government, which I did for 6 months, and pulled together a variety of conversations, pulled together some actually quite difficult, torturous meetings, but they were really, really honest and open dialogues with a view to saying, I'm not being partisan here. I'm saying we've got a series of issues, organisational protection and various people falling out completely. Can we just get some good things done via government so that we all have that combined voice? We sought to have an open source web route through government to have free templates that we developed in the Circle Initiative 20 odd years ago. I'm frustrated. I still hit lots of bids that have spent a load of money doing a template via a consultant when they could have the free industry templates for articles of association, for baseline agreement, for operation agreement. We created those with government money to always be available to the industry. And I get utterly frustrated they're not open source somewhere, because they should be, to update properly with coordination and collaboration with the industry, the guidance, because it was great when it got written by me. But it's old, it's tired, it's a decade on. And there's so much more we know, and there are so many more situations. And I thought we were going to get there with that. And then to have a very, very open forum for the industry run by government rather than by any organisation, so that all the organisations came together and those that are not in it, and we had open dialogue. None of those things have happened. And that's really, really frustrating. Okay, we've had a government change in the process, but even before the government change, they got scared because it was quite hard. And also because we just weren't important enough to them, because there was bigger fish to fry. But actually, there's so many things, and we have to find routes to honestly have that dialogue and make sure we're doing the right things. Feel free to decline these offers, but we have got two of those organisations in the room. Are either of you willing to say something? Sophie or Lisa? Good, you both are. Well done. I didn't brief you, so sorry about that.
Well, I think there's a lot of history, and some of us have come into this later. Some of you were around from the beginning. I think there's a lot of goodwill amongst those organisations whose members are business improvement districts, and in our case, the ATCM, local authorities and others as well. And you're right to say that a lot has changed in government. There have been many attempts. And in my short time, the last 11 years being involved with business improvement districts, and then more recently with the ATCM, what I've learned with government is that their priorities can change, and then government changes, and then there's a reshuffle, and then the work starts again. It doesn't start again from the beginning, but it starts again. And so it's upon us to regroup and find another approach and a way forward. In terms of how we interact with government, I think we're closer than ever to having that united voice and doing everything we can do the best for our members. And just one final point, I think we have to be, and I hope this comes across in a positive way, I think we have to be a little bit careful when we talk about good bids, bad bids. Are those the right words? Because what was really clear on that call that government did with about 70 bids prior to the efforts to rewrite the local authority guidelines for bids, there were bids on that call who were not members of the ATCM, not members of British Bids, not members of the Bid Foundation at the time, looking to improve, asking questions. And part of the reason why the Bid Foundation and the ATCM came together, one of the objectives was really to help support those bids, bring them into the family. And I think there's a job to do there about
bids who want to improve, who are just starting, who maybe don't have it right. We were having a conversation beforehand about revisiting some aspects of how we work. We've got 8 new directors. How do I explain to them, train them when they're coming to this fresh? I think we need to think about how we can join up together to support the bid industry.
I have previously worked for British Bids. I'm now back within the fold. There's a lot to do in terms of this partnership approach. There's a lot more honesty that needs to be put into play. I think there's probably an open conversation, a really honest conversation between the industry organisations that lead certain aspects, want to be leading certain aspects. But there's so much experience between the two organisations that we probably should be getting together and having an open conversation. It's not about the industry coming to us. We need to be going to the industry. We need to be asking what it is that you need from us as a membership organisation and how can we better partnership with you all. But equally, in terms of the accreditation piece, I don't think there should be a choice for bids to be accredited or not. We're talking about standards here. We're talking about raising the bar in terms of what we're doing as organisations. Previously, having worked within a bid and supported many others across the UK, there will be bids there. It's a lonely industry in a lot of cases, but we should be going out to the industry asking exactly how they want it played and what they want from us as industry organisations. I would welcome an open conversation with ATCM in terms of what it is that ATCM are doing, what it is that British Bids are doing, and what it is we should be doing for the industry moving forward.
I'd just like to add on the commercial interest point that not all commercial interests are equal. And I think there's a point here around almost exploiting the commercial interests for the industry's benefit. Certainly speaking for us as an organisation, 95% of our customers are bids. And the more they professionalise, the more they become data-driven, the more they become good, whatever that means. I think the more they are likely to turn to us or companies like us and look for solutions. Our interests are very much aligned with the industry, wanting to see better standards, and therefore I think we're a good ally, even though we have commercial interests in supporting the industry. I think that's why this works as well, and why we can have quite a good constructive conversations around innovation and standards and where it comes together. Sometimes you can feel, not just in this industry, but I've been in this industry for a few years, as a supplier to an industry, you can feel like a second-class citizen. You can feel like people are wary of you. So I would just ask you to be open-minded to the commercial interests and how you might be able to leverage them to your advantage. Because I presume one of the challenges with ATCM bringing in Bid Foundation, bringing in new members, is going to be resource. How do you resource an organisation like that to take on more initiatives, to take on different priorities? And those are ultimately commercial challenges. And is sponsorship an option? Are there commercial interests that could align with that to help make some of these things happen? I don't know, but maybe there's a solution in the problem that you posed somehow. Don't ask me for sponsorship, I don't have any money.
But he's helping build the spaceship again, which is good.
Very good.
And picking up, thank you both for those contributions and your honesty. This is a really tricky conversation, but we've got to have it. Sophie, your point about industry standards shouldn't be optional. When we developed the industry standards within the Bid Foundation, I wrote that checklist of 11 standards. I took the problems and turned it on its head and said, how do we answer those 11 problems? Because they should be the entry-level problems that everyone can deal with. The concept was that if you were a member within the Bid Foundation, you had to hold those standards. But even 2 years in, it still wasn't done. If we believe those things, we've got to have the courage to make that happen. We don't want to go down a New York model where we are controlled by the public sector, not least because we become politicised and we're trying to be apolitical. So if we don't want that, what do we do ourselves to make sure we actually self-police and ensure that there's kind of a wider open dialogue? And Lisa, just on last point on this, you just reminded me, I'd forgotten about that open call we had with 70 odd bids, and it was not moderated, was it? And that's what inspired me to go and talk to Remote CLD afterwards, because I was like, all these people laid bare all these things, and it wasn't because they were bad, it's because they didn't know the answer. And a load of mistruths got discussed in that call because no one moderated it. And I went into government and said, that's a great start, but could we get some facts in the conversation? Because we've just sent a load of people off knowing the wrong thing or not having an answer. And there's enough knowledge in the industry now to do that. And I guess, going back to our start, why are we doing this? We got caught up in it. Can we help provide some info for free for the industry to fill the gaps? Am I going to write a load of manuals for the industry for free? No, I'm not. I've done 20 years of that. But can we usefully do something that we quite enjoy and try and inspire it? Yes, we can do that. But somebody's got to fund all this properly, and it's got to be resourced properly and done in a way that people broadly buy into it, not just a faction, because that isn't going to be enough.
Which is a really good point. I do this every time.
I can't find your notes now. You told me you weren't bringing many notes this time.
Thank you to Arup Guide, Plan and Design the Future of the Built Environment. They are a global consultancy with advisory and technical expertise across more than 150 disciplines. And they have kindly supported us as being our host for our location today.
We've got one of the Arup team is on the board in Fitzrovia Partnership, and they're a great contributor. And one of their interesting pieces, coming back to Marcus's starting point, one of their really interesting pieces, they're a great big business that's community owned and believes in place and everything about it. And they're really keen to support and help the bid look after the little guys who are below the threshold of the bid, who don't pay the bid levy, but are what gives the rich fabric of this area. And that's the symbiotic relationship we talked about earlier. Let's not lose the big or the small. We actually need to join them together as well as possible.
So let's move on to section 3, looking at the future, and we'll throw it open to an open conversation, which I will step back from my moderation role and let things flow. But before I do, Julie, what is one thing you are hopeful about and one thing you are worried about looking ahead to the future?
Only one.
Just one.
I suppose the one that I'm worried about, because we haven't talked about it yet, is political instability in our nation and how much that's going to impact us, and we can't ignore it. That kind of political realignment of the two parties that we're seeing in 2024 election, lowest combined share of the vote ever. Far-right nationalism playing out, Operation Raise the Colours, we've all seen flags, and the challenges of them being up for more than 4 weeks and then looking absolutely rotten and being not just an eyesore, but a problem, a danger. And the rise of reform alongside that, and what that's doing to local politics as well as national politics. And Labour, significant decline in the polls at the moment since general election, and low trust. We've got an interest in politics anyway, whether we're Alistair or Rory, it doesn't really matter. So is everyone else now who never even had an interest in politics, because it's in our face every day, so we can't ignore it. When we're thinking about place, this is really right at the front and centre of what the everyday person is now thinking about. And we've got real inequalities, we've got disparities in our economy, we've got challenges of, the economy, NHS, immigration. But all of these things hit place, don't they? And more than that, they hit our local authorities who we're working with. And so that makes me really nervous. Are we going to have to completely, and maybe it's okay because Penny's charged just to try and write this for your mum, and maybe if we can do that, or for your kids, if we can do that, that actually helps for everyone else too, because we're going to have a completely different dialogue, potentially, in local authorities who are a completely different setup, age, socioeconomic class, knowledge base. Probably gone are the days, and we might bring Steph in here. Gone are the days that our challenge was our local authority was run by councillors whose average age was 83. Steph, tell us about your politics locally currently.
So in the Midlands, my name's Steph Kerr, I'm Chief Executive of the BID in Leamington Spa. We have an interesting political environment at the moment. Our county council is now reform-led with the youngest council leader, nearly 19. Before this, the team asked me how's that impacting us. We still have 3 levels of local government, so I still interact with our district council, but 2 years from now, because of local government reorganisation, that organisation is not going to exist in the same form, and there's going to be either 1 or 2 unitary authorities that we're engaging with. So it is the politics of change, isn't it? I have really good relationships with many council officers across both those organisations who reflect with me on the values they want to hold onto and how we can work together to do that. Those values are values that I think we all believe in. Looking after everybody in our communities, looking after all our businesses, making sure that our towns are accessible, making sure that buses still run and that those that can't drive can get into our places, making sure that there's disabled parking spaces and baby changing facilities. That's inclusion for us. We're also having conversations around how we can throw the door open to convene conversations with people new to politics. We convene conversations with our businesses. Some of us have been here a long time. My approach is to say, let's open the door. Let's educate, let's inform, let's inspire, let's challenge to continue to work together in our places across these reformed political contexts to harvest joy where we can. We can't forget that. I'm sitting here in a sparkly skirt. I probably should bring the sparkle to your places, make sure that you remember to do that and help these new people in these positions to tune into that, as well as the tricky things that they're trying to grapple with. So open the door. That's my thing to conversations.
Brilliant.
So in answer to political instability, bring the sparkle.
Absolutely. And then the flip to a kind of hopeful is the sort of the Pride in Place programme launched last week. Our mission is on the map. That's good, right? We're in the conversation. That's first step. The devil's in the detail. I'm quite nervous about some of that conversation. The community-driven element with virtually no money, that worries me enormously, that we can tell communities that they can control vape stores and goodness knows what else.
The 5 billion with it? Do you think that's...
Like, we've got enormous amounts of issues across the country, and I mean, that money's not going to go to the big cities where towns where bids are operating. They're going to go to much smaller locations predominantly. So there's going to be some money, but actually there's going to be an opportunity and an expectation that community is going to grab hold of this and make things happen. And if this was all achievable, it'd have been done already. You don't just do it because somebody's told they're allowed to close down a vape shop. But the positive of that is we've actually got this potential for a form of voting for us, and the mission is on the map. That's great. So I'm hopeful, but there's always detail, because I'm the detail geek, that we need to worry about.
One for me in there is the property owner bids. After speaking to our friends in Canada and how they value the voice of the property owners as a longer term interest in a place, the idea that those powers can be moved out from just London to the rest of the UK will be interesting to see if that gets taken up and embraced.
Yeah, and there will be some opportunities. I can't remember if we talked about this in the podcast yet, but when the original research work was done ahead of us getting the property owner bid legislation in London that was linked to other legislation, that's why it's only in London. The government did research into 6 locations, potential pilots, but the 6 locations that they chose were ridiculous because they were never going to be subject of property owner bids. So one of them, for example, was Keswick, where about 97% of the property in Keswick is owner occupied. So why would you put an owner bid in? There is some appetite for owner bids outside London. There is some appetite for potentially owner bids without an occupier bid. But it's not going to be an enormous rollout, and there are some dangers of it. We do need to be sure about how we align it. For example, you wouldn't want an owner bid being developed in a location where you already are running an occupier bid, but it'd be developed by someone else. Then they come over top of you. Haven't we just then created another problem where we're infighting? That would be quite disastrous.
So it feels like we started a lot of conversations and considered a lot of different topics. Now I'd just like to open it up to anyone. Questions, statements, views of the future. What should we do next? If Julie is kind enough to grace us with a season 2, what would you like us to cover, speak about, mix things up?
Right, let's start, because Alison's hand's up already. Let's start and move along. And do not feel obliged. You are allowed to pass the mic if you don't want to, but feel free if you do. Alison, go for it.
So it goes back to your point, Steve, about bids stepping into new areas, and our legislation requires a baseline agreement with the local authority. At what point do we need baseline agreements with our local police and crime commissioner, for example. I think that would be more honest.
We've convened a big forum with a new police crime commissioner who's also running for mayor. So we'll see what comes in a couple of weeks' time, because we've got the same thoughts as you there.
Nadia.
Hi, I'm Nadia, Team London Bridge Business Improvement District. One word that, with all the frustrations of being in a bid and the current political and economic climate, I think we haven't mentioned today, which is so important, is democracy. I think that's something we should fight tooth and nail for. We are in this very difficult democracy on this tiny island with so many players. I think we really need to remember that, celebrate that. And it does take more time, but it is because there is a democracy in place that we need to. And to your point, Steph, with a really challenging situation like that, but with the expertise that bids are now at, I think we can be putting some grit to the grindstone on that and making some changes in where we would like our places and not be scared of taking some of those risks on that. But I think democracy is something we cannot forget, and we can just look across the pond and be worried and concerned about that.
I'll talk again about Placemaking Europe. One of the speakers said that placemakers are caregivers of collective need. I thought that was a really interesting point, because we are great conveners, but sometimes we fall short of the doing. We allow things like really flashy strategies be the thing that is the final product. And local authority is really, really bad for that. And measurements and data is good, but just because you have it or just because you know what the issue is doesn't mean you are solving the problem. So I think that's a really important thing, is that we have the opportunity to do stuff. We might not have the permission sometimes, but I think that's actually a cool space to be in. Something I was thinking about, and Henry and I were talking just before, we rage against this digital side of stuff. We thought about a digital bid. What would a digital business improvement district look like? How do we get the ever-increasing income from these really big online giants? Yes, get the government to take the cash in, but then we lose out. So what is a digital bid? What does that look like? Can we organise one? Is there a UK, England, London, Southampton digital bid that we can reinvest money in real places?
Like, sort of scares the life out of me and really excites me. And it's not far away from that principle in the combined taxation model that Holb was saying, is how do we find the route to capture that digital tax element to reinvest in our local places, because that's where we're missing a big chunk of money. Yeah.
On that ambitious note, I think the future of bids really does hinge on us being, our willingness to be ambitious and bold. We need to help pave the way for more bids and support that can be offered bids, you know, not only in terms of how we engage with government, but also how our membership bodies work together to support bids and what that offering looks like. I'm not by any stretch thinking that we should overstep and that we should take on the responsibility of our statutory authorities or head down that mission creep route. But I think I'm talking about needing to, as bids, support our members, and as business communities, invest in our future and the future of the communities we support. Whether we're thinking about clients, customers, staff, visitors, residents, we're all invested in this ecosystem, and our businesses depend on that. And so I think, kind of a theme running through this, we need to acknowledge the significance of bids and as partnerships that can be transformative in our communities. It's that positioning of bids, because it will strengthen our partnerships overall and our other partnerships, our local authorities as well, because they're struggling. And a lot of them are ambitious and good, you know, however we define that. Our universities, our, you know, the police, our community organisations, our, you know, youth outreach groups, they're all doing fantastic things, but we need to strengthen ourselves to strengthen that partnership. And I think we need to see more bids across the country, digital or otherwise.
And perhaps we should finish on that strong note from Lisa there. So thank you very much all for attending.
Oh, I didn't know this wasn't scripted. Oh. And to you, thank you. My partner in crime has been such fun, even if I've made you go through the paces a bit.
Certainly challenged me to learn a lot very quickly in a short space of time for each episode. But no, it's
But if you don't know Henry very well, this is for the audience in the room, but for the audience outside the room too, The reason why this has worked is because at the beginning you didn't know a lot about bids, but you have an amazing ability and will to find stuff out and to interrogate and
AI.
but which is another topic for future.
Yeah.
And it's kind of a joy, therefore, because I'm like, constantly the referee and detail geek and everything else, and you're constantly pushing me out my comfort zone. And we as an industry need to do that. So I hope you've enjoyed it. I think it's been okay. You've been brilliant. And actually, I've really enjoyed looking at you all, looking really, really keen, nodding and reassuring. And there's been an odd face that's made me think, oh, what did I say? But thank you. You've been absolutely brilliant.
Okay, Henry here again. I hope you have thoroughly enjoyed this episode and this series. Thank you so much to Julie for being my co-host for this podcast and going through this experience with me. Loads of ideas for a potential second season, so we may well be back. But for now, thank you very much for listening, and goodbye.